Mihai grew up beneath a roof patched with his father's calloused hands. His mother always woke before sunrise. Her voice was sharp yet caring, making sure the household functioned with precision. To the villagers, he was quiet, hardworking, the kind of boy adults trusted to run errands without supervision. No one imagined the turmoil that would someday ripple across continents. From a young age, Mihai learned to observe rather than speak. He memorized every unspoken rule of behavior, every expectation placed upon him. Those who knew him often said he had a gentle look in his eyes, but even gentle looks can conceal storms. He dreamed often of bigger cities, of modern lights he only saw in magazines passed from hand to hand. He believed the world outside Romania could shape him into someone stronger, someone successful. All he needed was a chance. But in lives like his, opportunity rarely knocks without cost. There was a respected figure in the family, a wealthy uncle with influence far beyond the village church and marketplace. When the uncle offered Mihai the chance to work at his estate, everyone celebrated the good fortune, a step toward a better life. Or so they thought. The darkness that would shape Mihai's future was already waiting. The uncle's estate felt like another world. Polished floors, expensive furniture, laughter that seemed rehearsed. Mihai was grateful for the opportunity. The uncle praised his dedication, telling him that one day he might take over parts of the business. The words filled him with hope. Finally, someone saw his potential. But the compliments soon became unsettling. The uncle lingered too close when giving instructions. A hand on Mihai's shoulder lasted longer than necessary. Jokes dipped into uncomfortable territory. Mihai tried to ignore these moments, telling himself he was being overly sensitive. After all, this man had the power to change his future. One night, the uncle insisted they celebrate Mihai's progress with drinks. The atmosphere shifted shortly after both parties had a little too much to drink. Laughter faded into silence, replaced by an unwelcome touch, then force. Mihai's body froze, his voice stolen by fear and disbelief. What happened in that room was not just violence. It was humiliation cloaked in threats. Say a word, and your family suffers. That experience would never leave him. It lived quietly beneath the surface, changing the way he saw power, trust, and control. The villagers never knew why Mihai suddenly became distant, why his eyes carried a weight they couldn't name. Years later, psychologists would argue whether that night marked the true beginning of everything that followed. What is certain is this: a young man, once full of dreams, began planning his escape, not just from Romania, but from the version of himself that could still feel vulnerable. Mihai woke the next morning with bruises no doctor would ever examine and a silence no priest could bless away. Every sound in the uncle's house, the creak of a door, the scrape of a chair, became a reminder of a threat that chained him in place. He tried to continue working, but his hands trembled, and his uncle's smirks confirmed that the power imbalance was permanent. Days turned into weeks, each moment draining another piece of the hopeful young man he once was. He replayed the night over and over, convincing himself it was his fault for trusting too easily. The uncle, with his status and intimidation, continued life as if nothing had happened. Mihai, however, was drowning in a secret that burned like acid. He wanted revenge. Not dramatic, not loud, just a world where he was never helpless again. But revenge wasn't an option. His uncle's influence stretched through the village like a cage. His mother noticed his sudden quiet, but he simply said he was tired. His father urged him to stay strong, unaware his son's spirit had been cracked. Mihai realized that if he stayed, he would never be free. Every street reminded him of his shame. Every friendly face reminded him of what he couldn't say. So, he crafted a decision, one that would change not only his future, but the futures of people who had yet to even cross his path. Leaving Romania became his only form of survival. Mihai had managed to save some money over the years, which helped him secure a work visa for America. He wasted no time once his papers were ready. He stepped onto the plane with nothing more than a borrowed suitcase and a forged grin meant to convince the world he was ready for change. Romania shrank beneath the clouds, and with it, every piece of his old life. What he didn't realize was that trauma doesn't obey borders. It travels with the speed of light, fastening itself to memory. America greeted him with loud streets and unfamiliar sounds. He barely spoke the language, but he learned quickly. Necessity is a powerful teacher. Mihai took whatever work he could find. Loading trucks, washing dishes, even construction. Every paycheck felt like proof he was moving forward. Yet isolation followed him wherever he went. He watched coworkers share jokes, make plans, and fall in love. He studied how they interacted. Gentle touches, confident posture, as if he were learning a role he might one day perform. He wanted control over his life again, but he didn't have the tools to heal, only the instinct to hide weakness. At night, lying on a thin mattress in a noisy apartment, he wondered if crossing an ocean had changed anything at all. The nightmares said no. The fear of being powerless said no. The memory of that night said no. Still, he kept working, hoping success would eventually silence the past. What he couldn't see, what no one saw, was that the desire for control was growing stronger than his desire for normalcy. In time, that desire would find a disturbing outlet. Decades passed as he tried to blend in and naturalize in America. He was now over 50 years old, a man far away from home, with no real family in America, who has attained some success and stability that America has to offer, but still carries a past that ate him up gradually from the inside. He wondered if finding a partner to share life with will ease off some of the burdens he has carried on as a young man from Romania. But America only offered him stability, with no warmth or love to make his burdens feel any lighter. Shortly after, he met a woman that brought some sort of comfort to his life. Elena entered Mihai's life like a door he didn't expect to open. She was confident yet cautious, carrying her own history from Russia, stories she hinted at but never fully shared. They met at a grocery store, exchanging shy conversation over misplaced items and broken English. She admired his calmness, he admired her resilience. They were two outsiders in a country that rarely paused long enough to notice them. Their first dates were simple: cheap meals, long walks, awkward silences that became comfortable over time. Mihai discovered that Elena looked at him without suspicion. She believed his stories. She trusted his kindness. That trust gave him a sense of importance he hadn't felt in years. Marriage followed quickly. A courthouse signature, modest rings, hopes packed into a shared apartment. Friends of Elena celebrated the match. They saw a hardworking man devoted to building a life with her. To them, this love was proof that the American dream could still exist. But inside Mihai's mind, the walls never softened. Love did not erase the fear of being powerless. Touch did not replace the memory of violation. The closer Elena came to him emotionally, the more desperately he protected the darker corners of his psyche. He began constructing two versions of himself. One for the world, gentle, loving, harmless. One for his private emptiness, cold, calculating, one craving control. Elena had no idea a storm was forming beneath his calm exterior. A storm that would soon find victims far beyond their home. Years passed, and Mihai's ability to mimic a normal life became almost flawless. Every time Elena embraced him, he flinched internally. Every time he saw a woman walking confidently alone at night, his thoughts shifted from curiosity to something darker. He told himself he wasn't dangerous, only misunderstood. Yet he knew the truth. The assault had left a deep hunger to never feel powerless again. Mihai started watching strangers more closely, noting who looked nervous, who seemed distracted, who appeared alone. He became fascinated with how easy it was to approach women with friendly gestures, a harmless compliment here, and offer to help there. The mask he built over the years allowed him to charm without raising suspicion. He experimented with small moments of control, convincing a woman to change her route, pressuring another into sharing more personal information than she intended. Each success felt like regaining a piece of what was stolen from him long ago. Elena started noticing subtle changes in him. Late nights at work, unexplained detours before coming home. When she asked if everything was okay, he dismissed her concerns with practiced warmth. But in Mihai's mind, a new rule had formed. The world would no longer define him. He would define others, their fear, their fate, and their silence. And his first real step towards that twisted rule was imminent. On one fateful and random day, Mihai decided to go out for some drinks alone. The night air carried a quiet chill as Mihai lingered outside a neighborhood bar, pretending to smoke while scanning the sidewalk. Just then, he spotted a woman walking alone, phone tucked in her pocket, unaware of the danger studying her every move. He approached casually, offering a friendly greeting in his accented English. She smiled back, cautious but polite. That tiny acknowledgement of trust sent a jolt through him. He kept the conversation light. Jokes, compliments, questions about where she lived. Each answer brought her closer to risk. When she turned toward a dimly lit street, he followed with confident steps. "Let me walk you for safety," he insisted. She hesitated, but then agreed. Moments later, with no witnesses nearby, he made his move. A cloth pressed tightly over her nose and mouth, soaked with a sedative he had obtained after careful planning. Her struggle weakened quickly. Her phone fell to the ground. Her eyes lost focus. Mihai felt a surge of power igniting through him, the exact opposite of what he once endured. He dragged her to a more concealed area, violating the trust she'd given freely only minutes before. And when he was finished, he left her unconscious where no one would find her until morning. Back home, he washed his hands slowly, staring at his reflection. There was no guilt there, no shame, only satisfaction. Weeks passed, then months. More victims appeared, all with the same frightening detail. None remembered how they had been overpowered, just darkness, then shame. Police took reports, but with so little evidence, investigations stalled. The assaults seemed to vanish into thin air. Mihai blended perfectly into society. He held the door for strangers, tipped generously, and flirted harmlessly with cashiers. He walked through busy streets as a ghost in human form, unnoticed by those who unknowingly fed his hunger for control. Every successful attack taught him something new. He learned what time of night provided the best opportunities, which neighborhoods lacked cameras, and how quickly people trusted a friendly smile. Rumors began to circulate among young women in nightlife districts, warnings shared in whispers. Don't walk alone, stay in the light. But fear without a face felt like paranoia to many. And that was exactly what allowed him to continue. Elena sensed growing distance. Mihai's late-night outings became routine, each excuse more hollow than the last. She missed the man she fell in love with, but couldn't put her finger on what had changed. When she attempted deeper conversations, he shut down emotionally, leaving her to wonder if their marriage was quietly collapsing. Meanwhile, Mihai's confidence soared. He believed he was untouchable, clever, invisible. But every predator eventually slips. Every shadow eventually meets illumination. And his recklessness was beginning to attract attention. It started with a journalist determined to expose a pattern others hadn't recognized. She mapped reports of similar assaults across several nightlife districts, each case carrying the same frightening signature. Her article provoked public outrage and gave the faceless attacker a name, the Night Stalker of the East Coast. Headlines exploded, news anchors issued warnings, social media filled with shared safety advice and speculation. Who was he? How did he vanish so easily? Why did no one ever see him coming? Mihai watched every update with a twisted mixture of pride and irritation. Pride that he had become a headline, irritation that they spoke of him as if he were some faceless monster. He believed he was smarter, more methodical than any caricature portrayed on screen. In his mind, he wasn't a villain, he was a survivor reclaiming what life had stolen from him. But the publicity forced changes in his tactics. He couldn't risk carelessness now. He studied police responses, watching how their increased patrols pushed him into riskier territory. Higher stakes only thrilled him more. At home, Elena noticed him glued to the news, his expression unreadable. Law enforcement, fueled by public pressure, doubled down on their efforts. Detectives promised progress. Politicians demanded results. Panic became the soundtrack of the city. People feared the darkness in ways they never had before. But Mihai wasn't afraid. He was planning his next move. Elena once felt lucky to have found a partner who understood the struggle of starting over in a foreign land, but now she sensed something slipping away, replaced by a distance she couldn't ignore. Mihai began returning home later and later, offering excuses that sounded memorized rather than real. His phone was always locked. His attention wandered whenever she spoke. She tried to explain away the shift as stress from work, yet the warmth that once defined their relationship had cooled into icy politeness. Elena confided quietly in a coworker, asking whether it was normal for a husband to spend so many nights outside to seem like he was living two different lives. The coworker suggested couples counseling, but Mihai scoffed at the idea when she mentioned it. "Nothing is wrong," he insisted. The tone he used, sharp and absolute, silenced her. At night, Elena lay awake listening to him breathe, wondering what thoughts hid behind his closed eyes. She feared she might be losing him, unaware she was living with someone far more dangerous than a distant spouse. Meanwhile, Mihai felt her suspicion growing. Her questions made him defensive, irritated. He convinced himself she was the problem, that she was threatening the fragile control he had built over his life. One evening, Elena caught a glimpse of something on the news that made her chest tighten. A map of recent assaults near places Mihai had claimed to be. The first seed of terrifying doubt was planted. Every creditor eventually makes a mistake. Mihai's own Lou came on a night when he felt too confident, too eager, too certain of his own invulnerability. His target was a woman leaving a late shift, fumbling with her keys as she hurried across a quiet parking lot. Mihai struck swiftly, pressing the sedative-soaked cloth over her face. But this time, something went wrong. She fought harder than he expected, clawing at his skin, leaving behind scratches that bloodied his cheek. Panic surged. He fled sooner than planned, leaving her conscious enough to stagger to help before fully collapsing. And unlike the others, she remembered fragments. His Eastern European accent, the scratch on his face, the way he smelled faintly of industrial chemicals. At the hospital, detectives listened carefully. For the first time, they had more than fear, they had a description. The woman's courage breathed new life into the investigation. When Mihai got home that night, Elena gasped at the sight of his injuries. He claimed a work accident, but his trembling hands betrayed him. She noticed something else too, the faint scent of a substance she didn't recognize on his clothes. Across the city, police rushed to collect evidence from the scene. A single crucial clue would soon emerge, one that could finally connect multiple cases to a single man. Mihai didn't know it yet, but the walls were starting to close in. Mihai's arrest did not end the investigation. In many ways, it accelerated everything. Detectives needed more than a single assault case to hold him for good. Their suspicion, sharpened over months of quiet alarm, told him he was responsible for far more. They shifted their focus to old missing persons files, women who had vanished after nights out in the same neighborhoods Mihai once drifted through. The thought grew unsettling. If even one of those women had crossed him, her fate might have been sealed. A break came when a forensic analyst working late noticed a familiar chemical profile from a 2-year-old case. A woman had been found unconscious near a riverbank, revived only to die in a hospital days later. Her death was ruled a complication from exposure and head trauma,
But now, a forgotten trace of the same sedative found in Mihai's surviving victim matched her blood sample. That discovery forced everyone to rethink the case. They exhumed her body. The detectives didn't know what they hoped to find, only that they could no longer dismiss the possibility that this was not a tragic accident, but another attack. The medical examiner found bruising patterns consistent with restraint, signs overlooked before, obscured by cold and time. Even in death, she had a story left to tell. But prosecutors knew they needed more. A single misclassification wouldn't be enough to challenge Mihai's defense. They needed survivors, evidence, voices. They needed the one thing Mihai always stole from his victims: a chance to fight back. Detectives decided to pick up his wife Elena for some questioning. Elena sat across from the investigator, anxiety tightening every inch of her body. She didn't want to believe the accusations. The man they described, cold, methodical, without conscience, was nothing like the partner she thought she knew. She spoke quietly, each word chosen with care, as if saying the wrong thing might make the situation worse. She has nightmares, she admitted. He wakes up sweating, shaking, but he never talks about it. The investigator nodded, leaning forward. Has he ever mentioned something from his past that makes him angry, anything that doesn't feel normal? Elena hesitated. There were moments, slight glimpses, that now seemed sharper in retrospect. The way Mihai flinched when touched unexpectedly, his fear of being humiliated in public, a silent tension when anyone mentioned family. Those details once felt like scars from a hard life. Now they suggested something deeper. She asked the question out loud, even though she feared the answer. "Do you think he hurt those women?" The investigator didn't respond immediately. His silence weighed more than any words could. She realized how little she truly knew about the man she had vowed to share her life with. Her memories, smiles, shared meals, whispered plans, suddenly vibrated with doubt. Then came the moment that shifted her world. The investigator showed her a piece of evidence, a cloth sealed in plastic, fibers matching towels found in her own home. Her pulse hammered in her chest. She wanted to defend Mihai, she always had, but the truth no longer bent in his favor.
Elena returned home that night to a house that no longer felt like hers. Mihai's shoes by the door, his favorite jacket hanging neatly on the hook, the photo on the wall where they both smiled as if life had forgiven them. Everything was familiar, and everything was tainted. She walked through the living room in silence, replaying the investigator's words, the evidence, the victims, the questions she never dared ask. When she opened their bedroom closet, she noticed something she had never examined closely, a locked metal box tucked behind his winter clothes. Her pulse raced. She should have ignored it, left it for the detectives, but curiosity overpowered caution. She found a screwdriver, pried it open, and stared in horror. Inside were small items, earrings, a bracelet with a cracked clasp, a folded piece of silk, and a bottle labeled with a chemical name she couldn't pronounce. Her legs weakened as a sickening truth settled over her. Mihai wasn't a misunderstood man haunted by trauma. He was someone who used his charm as bait, a predator hiding in plain sight. As sirens wailed in the distance, police preparing another search, Elena knew she had to make the hardest decision of her life. For years, she protected him, defended him, loved him, but love couldn't silence the screams of those he hurt. She sat at the kitchen table, phone in hand, tears falling hard. When the detective answered, she whispered 5 words that sealed Mihai's fate. "I have something for you." Mihai sat in a cramped interrogation room staring at the cinder block wall as though it were the only stable thing left in his life. He had been silent for hours, refusing to give them anything. The detectives needed a breakthrough, and Elena provided it. They placed the metal box on the table in front of him. His demeanor cracked. His hands twitched, jaw clenched, rage and fear colliding behind his eyes. One detective leaned in quietly. "Your wife turned this in. She wants the truth." That sentence cut deeper than any accusation. Mihai's mind spiraled back to the night at his uncle's estate. The humiliation, the violation,
The alcohol-soaked breath against his neck, the whispered threat that shaped his entire existence. He had buried that memory under cruelty and power. Now it clawed its way to the surface. "I was the one hurt first," he snapped, voice shaking. "Nobody ever protected me." The confession spilled out, not as remorse, but as justification. He described the fear he once lived with and the twisted relief he felt when he controlled someone else. Each admission tightened the noose. Detectives didn't interrupt. They needed his words as evidence, but they knew none of it would ever excuse what he did. When the recorder clicked off, Mihai slumped back in his chair, breathing shallow. His crimes were no longer shadowed in secrecy. They now belonged to the law. And his greatest fear, losing the one person who once believed in him, had already come true. The courtroom was packed, survivors in the front rows, their families beside them, hands linked tightly. Each woman had lived through a nightmare and found the strength to sit where justice could finally speak for them. Mihai entered wearing a suit that did little to hide the emptiness in his expression. He avoided Elena's eyes. She sat near the back, shoulders stiff, her wedding ring gone. The prosecutor laid out the truth without theatrics. The charm Mihai used as camouflage, the chemical sedative, the trophies he kept, his meticulous approach to controlling every detail. The survivors described waking up confused, terrified, and forever changed. Tears fell, some voices wavered, but each testimony hit the court with the weight of years lost to trauma. Mihai listened in silence, but inside him something churned, a fractured mix of resentment and the distant echo of a life he could have chosen instead. The judge, stern and deliberate, spoke with clarity. "You inflicted fear and pain on those who trusted your kindness. You stole their peace to quiet your own demons." Then came the sentence. 35 years in prison, no possibility of parole. A murmur swept through the room, relief, grief, and the solemn acceptance that justice, though achieved, could never restore everything. As marshals led Mihai away, Elena wiped her tears quietly. She wasn't crying for the man he had become. She cried for the one she once thought existed. Years later, his name remained attached to something the public refused to ignore. Documentaries debated whether trauma shaped him or merely provided an excuse. Psychologists called him a case study in how monsters disguise themselves as ordinary men. But for the survivors, it wasn't psychology. It was healing, slow, uneven, but unstoppable. Each woman rebuilt what he tried to break. Some found support groups, others rediscovered trust through new relationships. They weren't defined by what he did to them, but how they rose afterward. Elena moved to a new city, returns to her maiden name, and started again. Some nights she still wondered who Mihai could have been if violence never touched his youth. But she never forgot that choices, his choices, carved the path that led him here. In a correctional facility far from the world he once manipulated, Mihai woke each morning to the same steel bars and the same realization that power is temporary, consequences are not. The world had moved on without him. The Romanian man who fled a nightmare ended up creating one for others, and in the end, the only person he destroyed completely was himself. If this story made you question how well we know the people beside us, subscribe and stay tuned. Next week, we expose another truth hidden behind a familiar smile, right here on our channel. Thank you for watching. I will be seeing you on our next episode.